fight their oil war. National Geographic and the Times-Picayune, they forecast the apocalypse, said it was coming soon. Preparations must be made, they said, time. It was years ago, they shouted, inaction was a crime. They said the dikes must be improved and the wetlands must be seen. But Washington decided instead they should be paved, 'cause malls were more important.
Bringing peace and social justice issues into your living room piece by piece. I'm your host, Pat Miner, and tonight we're going to be talking about the first in the nation Iowa caucuses. And we have with us this evening two very special guests, Democratic activist Claire Olson.
Hi, Pat.
And Ann Owen.
Hi, Pat.
Yeah, she's going to be attending her first Iowa caucus this January. So we're going to talk about what they are, where they are, when they are, and why they're important to start out with.
That's the most important part, why they're important.
Okay, should we start there?
Let's start there. Well, they're important because we have a responsibility in democracy to make sure it works. Mm-hmm. And it's not self-actuating. Democracy takes work. And it's an important component of living in Iowa. It's one of, we talk about the clean air and the wonderful values. Well, one of the values is you dance with democracy in Iowa, and you do that by going to the caucus. And it can be fun sometimes.
Yeah, it can be fun, and I'm here to tell you that it is. I've been going to caucuses myself for, what did I say, 30 years?
30 years.
That tells you about how old I am, doesn't it?
Right.
But
and what are you looking forward to about this? Because you've been hearing about them, right?
Well, I've been hearing about caucuses for years. Being from a political family, it's kind of, it's a stepway into politics, and I'm excited to help try and make a change. I don't know, try and help, I guess.
Mm-hmm. And that's where it starts, because you learn things at the caucus. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's, right. And each generation has different issues. But in '72, certainly I was learning about the Vietnam War. Mm-hmm. Because you would go and you would listen to people trying to persuade you to do something or not do something. Mm-hmm. And it's a learning experience among us. And it's an interesting educational environment, mm-hmm. I think. Because there's always somebody there that knows something more than you do. Mm-hmm. And then there's somebody there that knows a lot less than you do.
Yeah.
So
right.
And
let's talk a little bit about, I think there are probably people who are listening to us right now who don't even really have a concept of what a caucus is. It's a gathering of like-minded activists
who believe in political parties.
Who believe in political parties. Right. And so the Democrats have a caucus and the Republicans have a caucus.
And it's the beginning of the process for each political party. They meet on the same night. Mm-hmm. They meet in homes, they meet in schools, they meet in cafeterias. And if you want to know where they meet, you can call up your local county Republican Party or your local county Democratic Party, or online, mm-hmm. and just type Google Iowa Democratic Party or Iowa Republican Party, and then they'll ask you for your zip code, and you can know where to go.
And you'll find out where to go?
And find out where to go. And you can take somebody with you. I'm a big person on taking mm-hmm. somebody to the caucus with you.
Yeah.
And you'll have to sign in.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll have to sign in that for the Democrats that you don't have to be eligible to vote. You don't have to be registered to vote. You can register there. Mm-hmm. It's a process for both parties about how to construct a political party. And political parties are not necessarily in favor these days, right? There's a big movement right. online. Let's elect a president online. Nonpartisan, non-political party, and I think that that's a mistake. Mm. And sometimes I'm a reluctant Democrat, and each political party has their party platform online, so you know what mm-hmm. what you are. But it's a big home, the Democratic Party particularly. Mm-hmm. Right, left, in the middle, undecided.
So in the Democratic caucus, we'll sign in first. The first thing we'll do is sign in. And then this year we don't have we have a candidate, but he's already been chosen because it's the president, and he's going to be our nominee. But in the Republican side, and then 4 years ago we had this process too, and I guess I'm not 100% sure, but I think their process is pretty similar to ours in terms of presidential preference groups.
Right.
For example.
And they have a different process. You should indicate that they were invited but elected not to participate tonight, right? Okay. So, and there are also, Democrats, this is at the Republican too, there are special guests. There are elected officials or people that are running for office, or somebody stands, I'm thinking about running for office, and there we, talk to them.
So one of the things we do is sign petitions to put people on the ballot.
Right.
That's one of the functions
And
of
this is the
a
beginning
caucus.
of a process which lasts until the beginning of the summer. Because after we have these caucuses, then we have county conventions in which people who are elected at the caucus go on to meet again at the county level. And then we have districts, congressional districts, and then we have a state convention. So it's part of a process which is, at least in the Democratic Party, based on voting. And not too much wheelie dealing, but sometimes.
Sometimes wheeling and dealing, especially when you're doing presidential candidate preference groups. Again, have those this time, but the Republicans will. And what they do in the Democratic Party, and I assume it's similar in the Republican Party, is we choose the candidate that we want to be president or to be our nominee for president, and we gather like-minded individuals together. And you get in these preferential groups. You physically get up and leave your seat and get together with other people who agree with your same candidate, and then you see whether or not you're viable. What does that mean?
Well, viable means that you have a certain minimum number of people to elect a delegate. It's usually 15% of the total people present. And that's to make sure, again, it's an interesting lesson in democracy. Viability, which first time I heard it, I thought, what are we talking about here? But what it means is that you have enough people, you've persuaded enough people to be a significant mass. I remember one of the first I went to was in Rochester, Iowa, and there was a guy sitting in the corner, and I said, who are you from? He says, my union sent me here, I'm for Paul Simon. And I said, well, you're not going to be viable, you're the only person here for Paul Simon. He goes, I'm for Paul Simon. And so it was a challenge for viability. That was the Jesse Jackson year. At least in that particular. But everybody said, well, okay, but you have to come and sit with us because you can't be viable, but we know that about you, and give us your rap about Paul Simon. And because he had a thing to give and spoke about it, and then he kind of, and became a very good friend actually, and I laugh about, it was interesting education and viability. But I don't think we're going to have that this year. So, Anne, what do you think you want to talk about? People want to talk about the caucus.
Well, a big thing is how, if we'll be able to pay for our colleges. That's a big one. Future job markets. Our futures. We have to look down the road at least 20 years to see if 50% of us will even be able to get jobs right out of college. So
it must be pretty scary.
It is a scary thought, and college is scary in general, and adding the new job markets and new economy it just adds to the to the scariness of it.
So does it help to think that maybe you can make a difference? Maybe you can do something about it?
I always believe making a difference is an important thing, and this is no different. I'm excited to open this chapter, grow up a little bit, get to vote, get to caucus, get to help. Yeah, and so are you planning to, another big part of the caucus process is to bring
what we call resolutions.
These are right, and this is the way we develop a party platform in the Democratic Party, and a good way, because I know right now there's people there like, well, I'm an independent. You know, I don't believe in either. I vote for the person. Well, you know, persons have principles and ideas, and you need to know what principles and ideas are. And a lot of people say, well, I don't participate because I don't know enough. You know, well, there's nothing in the Constitution that says only smart people or educated people get to vote.
Right.
This is a really democratic with a small d process. And it is important that the issues that our people are talking about in their living room come into the caucus process. So this is a particular invitation for Occupy Iowa to come and participate in the caucus. Come, and you can get the resolution form, which is really just a simple form online, but you can just come and say, this is what I believe in. Do you believe in this? Let's vote on it.
Right. In most caucuses that I've ever attended do not require a formal resolution written. You can handwrite resolutions on a piece of paper and hand that in. What you'll be asked to do is to read your resolution and have a discussion about it. And whether your resolution is voted up or down, the important thing is that you'll get a chance to talk about it, about what matters to you.
And resolutions that have a beginning, a middle, and an end are very well desired. I mean, rambling is tolerated, but you know, it's generally not.
Yes, it's best to have a succinct.
Right, but the demographics of a caucus are interesting. So, for example, the political process in Iowa, where our mean age is 36, is really dominated by old folks like me. It's dominated by Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid, interesting issues. But, you know, and 17, those aren't your issues, right? Nor should they be. And so I think it's really important that we get a broad spectrum of people participating, age-wise. When I started, my first caucus, was your first caucus in 72?
I didn't caucusing till much later.
Oh, all right. Well, mine was in 72, and women at that time were not particularly, let's say, appreciated in the Democratic Party. And so that was my first experience of having to convince people, large groups of people, as we went up the process to the state convention, that it was important that we have women with voices, and that the women had ideas, and there were topics about women, whether it was equal pay or reproductive issues or workplace issues, family medical leave issues. And of course, at the time, the caucuses were also dominated by the Vietnam War. But this time, I think, and probably you'll look back, Ann, because it's going to be dominated by the economy.
Right.
Right? I mean, and student loan issues, I think, are I mean, people coming out of undergraduate with $60,000, $80,000 worth of student loans can't transform the world if you have a mortgage on your back.
Yeah, I think that's very important too. And also, I mean, I think it goes right along with that in terms of student loans, but whether higher education is accessible to the whole population, partly because of the fact that it costs so much. So that's part of the same issue, but it's accessibility and whether we can pay it back.
And I think it's helpful to come to the caucus with like a topic. Many people have different topics, but it's nice to have a topic and then have 3 sources of information about it, and thinking some way or another I'm going to be able to distribute this and get people to talk about it. And if you come to the caucus, that's encouraged. I mean, yes, you can come and you can sit like a log and not talk to anybody or participate and just vote. You can do that, and it's better than sitting in your living room, but the better way
is to participate, to really participate in the discussion, is to participate in, bringing your resolutions.
Now, Ann, you participated in the caucus, the presidential caucus last time, as a child care provider, right?
Yeah.
And where was it?
Well, our caucus was at West Branch High School, and I cared for people's children as they participated in the caucus, so didn't really get to experience it too much, but
it was a full room. It was a packed house,
right.
wasn't it?
There were a lot of people people bribing with sandwiches. It was entertaining for sure.
And I remember the Clinton people had come with food.
The
That
Clintons.
was very helpful, even though the West Branch school system did not allow food. But I think for that evening, we kind of bent the rules a little bit.
Well, I think even John Edwards had food.
Yes,
I remember that.
That's true. I was ushering people down aisles. You know, one of the things when you're doing a caucus, a pro like me likes it when everybody has a seat they have to sit in. There were over 300 people. But the fun thing was to go up to for the auditorium, people coming in and saying, you know, who are you caucusing for? And it'd be a couple, and they'd look at each other. And I think, don't people talk to each other anymore? And one would say, well, I'm thinking about Obama, or the other one would say, well, I'm thinking about Edwards or Clinton. And they'd look like they were amazed. I said, well, would you like to take a little time and, you know, step outside and think about this? And, so you might want to talk if you're in a relationship. You might want to talk about this.
Oh, good idea. Good idea.
But so, how old were the kids? Mostly young.
Mostly toddlers.
Really?
I'd say. Oh
That's
yeah.
good.
I'd say 3 to 8.
That was a wonderful service that people who may not have otherwise been able to come to the caucus were able to come because Anne provided childcare.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, and I don't know, you know, whether there will be that service at caucuses, you know, this time or not. Probably in some, yes.
In
and
some, yeah.
no.
So you might, if that's a concern that you have, call ahead of time.
Mm-hmm.
The Democratic Party in Johnson County is at 321 Market Street.
Mm-hmm.
And you could stop in there or call them, and I'm sure they would have that information.
Mm-hmm.
So what was your first big issue when you went to the caucus?
What was the first big, I don't remember why I suddenly went to a caucus. It was, the first one I went to was in West Branch, and I didn't move to West Branch until 1985, so, or 4, maybe. And so that was my first caucus experience, and it was in the country, and at someone's house. And that's what I remember. I do not remember what, you know, why I decided to suddenly go. I do remember, I was, when I lived in Iowa City, I went to school in Iowa City. And one of my best friend's mother was was a state representative at the time. But I would never even vote for her. I said, unlike Anne, I said, I don't know the issues, and I don't want to, you know, vote for somebody without knowing and really understanding, you know, where they stand and what they stand on. And so I didn't vote. I didn't even vote, let alone go to the caucuses when I was in college.
Well, and that's the problem with today's society is I hear kids all the time in my high school say that they don't know the issues, therefore they don't really care. But
Yeah.
the problem with that is we need to know the issues because at our age, we're the ones who not only will deal with whatever happens in this election, we might not have an educational system after this election.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's a big deal for us to understand the issues, and our teachers preach about this all the time, about us getting involved. And I just think people take it for granted that we can even do it.
Right.
I mean, as kids at our age, we need to start learning the issues and getting involved now so we can help make our own future, so people aren't deciding a future for us.
And your counterparts in Egypt and in Libya and in Yemen, the whole Arab Spring, which is so youth-dominated, are dying to do this, aren't they?
Right.
Yeah.
You know, it's just so exciting to me, you know. And I mean, when we went to a labor protest in Des Moines last year, right? And my favorite sign was the one that said, "Stand up like an Egyptian."
Yeah.
It was
wow, that's
so
great.
cool.
Yeah.
And that feeling, you know, my generation's challenge, I think to a large extent, was identifying across race lines. But I think your generation's challenge is really it's global. You know, like how do you, you know, what is an Egyptian 17-year-old reading? You know, what's a 17-year-old Libyan wanting for their country. And if you're on the street, and this is a good night to come in and talk to us. I wish somebody, nobody invited the women's movement into the Iowa Democratic Party. We kind of, went in and said, hey, we're here, deal with us. And I thought, when I get old and gray, I want to be more welcoming. And so I particularly want to welcome Occupy Iowa. I want to welcome people that are on the street for environmental issues or corporate personhood issues, whatever their issues are, talk. And
yeah, I'm hoping they will come into the caucuses. My fear is that they will stand outside and, not necessarily try to prevent people from coming in, but that they won't join us. And they're being invited to come in from all over the country. So they can't come into the caucus because they're not Iowans.
Well, no, but you can always attend a caucus as an observer.
Right.
I had. I'm originally from Brooklyn, New York, and so I still have classmates, etc. And it's very hard to get a New Yorker to come to Iowa, but the caucus can do it.
Yeah.
And several times I said, come and just observe. You're not going to be able to vote, but you can observe. And they find it fascinating. Yeah. Or I know you made phone calls, right?
I did make phone calls.
I remember the first phone call. And the last election cycle, we were making phone calls into New York City. And of course, people were amazed that somebody was calling them from Iowa, or just calling them. In Iowa, with 2 million people during the political season, at least if you're a Democrat, you're going to talk to somebody. You're probably going to talk to somebody 3 times, and you're going to be disgusted at the end of it. I wish they'd stop calling. I'm tired of it. Man, when you're on that phone calling other parts of the country, what an asset it is, and what a privilege it is. That this is a privilege of democracy. That a fellow citizen, a neighbor, another American can call you on the phone and talk about politics. I can just feel the freedom in that, right? And we got, I'm bored with this, or
What about the Iowa caucuses? It's first in the nation. Why is that important? What role does Iowa play that no other state plays, except for the possible exception of New Hampshire?
Well, I have the pro answer, but what do you think, Anne? How do you feel about it being first?
I think that we use our caucuses to possibly set the bar. And I think other states should use that, other caucusing states, to try and get more people and try and get more people involved, and use that.
It's also a matter of economics. You can come into Iowa with a couple of $1 million and become president. You cannot do that if in a primary state like California or New York, where it basically becomes its entire media market. So in a large population state, the political process relies really on the media, and that means money. Iowa, of course, relies on the media too, but at least in the Democratic Party, and you'll see this with the Republicans too, it requires organization. It requires people, and it requires conversation. And the last, and there's a couple of books written about the caucus, obviously. I don't think any of them are particularly great, at least I've read. Maybe I shouldn't say that.
There's a new one out by a professor at the University of Iowa. I think he's not there anymore, but he was. Red Loss. It's called Why Iowa.
Right.
Yeah.
And he comes to the conclusion that it's a good thing. It's very hard to explain to sometimes the national media. During the last caucus season, I volunteered years, which I knew was going to be too long, and I'd be exhausted in the last 3 months, and I was. But the staffer for my candidate kept on saying 2 things to me. Is it a movement yet? And I'd say, no, it's not a movement yet. There's not thousands on the street, and there's no song, but it's not a movement yet. And are we going to win? Are we going to win the caucus? Are we going to win the caucus? And until the week before, I would say this for 2 years, I said, I don't know if we'll win or not. But if our candidate wins the Iowa caucus, he will be president of the United States. And that was true, and I felt that very strongly because with President Obama, it was a history-making candidacy. And the rest of the nation looks to Iowa to kind of vet, right? And to say, and that vetting was done at many levels. Most obviously, it was done on the basis of race. Iowa is not a racially diverse state, so that if white people could vote for an African-American man, that said quite a bit both to the African-American community and to white Americans, other Americans, but also less obviously on age. Iowa's not, especially caucus goers, are generally 10 or 15 years older than this particular candidate, and you were asking baby boomers to vote outside their generation, which I must say, although I usually like baby boomers, I'm at the margin of them, they found that hard to do. But
they weren't quite ready to let go of that.
That's correct, and it's not a positive thing of our generation, frankly. But that's probably that's a topic for another show,
another topic.
Right? Versus baby boomers. And the other thing is you can see and talk to the candidates.
Right.
So we take this for granted, right? I mean,
The joke is that a national media spokesperson asked an Iowa caucus goer how he felt about a particular candidate, and he said, "Well, I'm not really sure. I've only talked to him twice."
Right.
And people in other states never get a chance to talk to candidates at all.
And so when I say to my East Coast friends, I saw candidate Obama 22 or 23 times, and Michelle Obama 5 or 6, and had fairly extensive conversations. Their mouths just drop open. Well, somebody has to do that in America.
Right.
And we forget how huge this country is. And we figured out the caucuses. I mean, we have figured it, just the logistics of this are rather intimidating. So for example, with all due respects to Las Vegas and Nevada, another caucus state, they were a caucus and they stopped being a caucus, now they're back to being a caucus. And the presidential, they didn't figure it out. So because I was in touch with staffers and they said, well, we're in a high school and some people think it's the other people think it's another precinct, or somebody else said, we don't have anybody running this meeting. Well, the logistics of Iowa, in our very kind of efficient, humble way, we kind of have that figured out. I mean,
we've been doing it long enough.
Yeah, we've been doing that long enough, and that's an infrastructure. The other thing I think that Iowa is not corrupt. There are states in the United States, unfortunately, some of our sister states, which are corrupt. The political system is corrupt. And people have not hope or the energy to have fixed it. Iowa doesn't have this. I mean, we may have stupidity, we may have ignorance, but we rarely have corruption. I mean, we have some of it, but most of the time we've just bitten off more than we can chew, or we're making stupid stuff. And the thing of it, also, one other thing I don't know what context to say this in, but rare to come back from a caucus without a new idea. I don't care how small the caucus is, or whether it's rural or urban. This is the place you're going to say, I didn't think about that. Or what did you think? Why did you think so-and-so was interested in that topic?
Yeah. It'd be interesting. Well, I just got the high sign that we're halfway through the show, and so I just want to remind our viewers that we're at Iowa's First in the Nation caucuses tonight with our guests Ann Owen and Claire Olson. And please join us in the conversation. And I'm sure that Jared is flashing up on the screen as we speak, our phone number. Please call us and tell us what you think about the Iowa caucuses. Ask a question about the Iowa caucuses, whatever you'd like to do.
So what was your most outrageous caucus event?
The most outrageous caucus event. Oh, I can't even think of one. How about you?
Well, I have one, of course, that's why I asked you.
Yes.
And it was,
Maybe I'll think of something.
I was running a caucus in Iowa City. It was pretty big, maybe 300 people in a high school. And we had broken up into presidential preference groups. And this was the year that John Glenn was running for president. And that had been an interesting candidacy because he had the best dressed staffers I had ever seen. And he never got off an 8x11 yellow pad. But he had huge crowds because people were bringing their children to see this astronaut, right? And usually candidate in those days, now candidates are more prepared, but in those days they started with an 8.5 sheet of paper. And then after they gave their stump speech for several weeks, they go down to a 5x7 card, and then they go down to an index card, and finally they would give their speech in an impromptu way. Well, I think the last time, once you get lawyers as candidates, you get people that don't need notes.
Right.
So, but in those days, you still needed notes. And with all due respect to Mr. Glenn, I thought he was rather dubious in his rhetorical abilities. But anyway, so we're in the caucus, and there's 2 people sitting in the Glenn preference group. And I thought, right, I know that guy. So I jump up on a chair and I say, okay. I said, John Glenn is dead. Well, people took this literally, and people started gasping and saying, what do you mean? I said, I mean, he's not politically viable. There's only 2 people sitting in this corner. So the night that I declared John Glenn dead, I learned not to be so.
Not to say it
not
literally,
to say
yeah.
it so literally.
Yeah.
What do you think that the lack of newspaper reading in your generation is part of this?
Yes, and I also think another part of it is because we are so sports centered. I know especially at my high school, it's athletics. Everyone's in athletics, and that's where we spend our time, which is...
Well, now, speaking to somebody that's on the basketball team,
I
right?
am, but I also am on the newspaper staff.
Well, that's true.
So it gives me a little leeway. So I think that might play a role in it, and that's...
So getting an expanded vision.
Right. People in my generation need to start to learn how to look outside of the hallways at our little person high school.
That's hard, though. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons I didn't vote. And you're exactly right. I think we put ourselves into this little box, and the thing that's important is who wins the basketball game, or whether I'm going to pass the test and how long I have to study for it, or who's singing the best song on the radio.
Well, I think also sometimes the political parties don't make the best, don't do the best outreach, right?
Right.
I think we need to spend more time in government classes. I think we need to spend more time in high school saying, here are some issues you might want to think about. This is how the political party in this state operates, in fact.
Right.
Because it is asking a lot, I think, for a 17 or an 18-year-old to jump into the political process.
Right. I mean, from my standpoint, I grew up in a household. We watched Hardball with Chris Matthews every night when it on TV, or Countdown with Keith Olbermann, and my dad had us watch The West Wing. You know, coming from my point of view, it was just, you looked to the bigger scope of things. You do things now that will benefit you for the future, but you also do things, for the time being. I play sports, but I also am looking for issues in my future. I have to, the college I want to go to, the amount of years I need to be there, the cost that'll be. People just need to broaden their horizon. And partially it's not their fault, it's their own, growing up. I can say that I'm probably one of the only ones out of my friends who grew up with a news channel on during dinner. Mm-hmm. Most of them, their parents just weren't interested in that, so they therefore aren't either.
Well, and I think part of it is these days, I know when you talk about young people having a hard time being involved in politics, there are a lot of adults that have a hard time being involved in politics right now because of the economy. Too many people are working too hard to put dinner on the table, to keep their kids in school because it costs too much to send them, and they don't have enough time or energy to. And
democracy takes some time.
It takes some time.
It doesn't take a lot, but it takes some time. We're now working more hours than even in the Japanese. Yeah. And so when you're working 10 and 12-hour shifts, this is kind of jumping ahead post-caucus, but we will soon be in the situation which we're trying to get people to the polls and getting people to vote. And it's so frustrating for an activist like me that last 3 or 4 days when people say, oh, I got called into work, I have to work.
Yep.
And the impediment that your economics comes up against that political system.
That's why we talk about early voting,
way.
Though, in terms of,
that's right,
because too many of those things do pop up.
Right.
But it's just, yeah, you're talking about even the very basic thing of just voting.
Right. One of the, Iowa had a same-day voter registration now, and last year, the last presidential cycle, I think that generated about 25,000 new voters. And about half of those were people being registered to vote, they were just registered at the wrong address. But the other half were people that had never voted. And it was amazing to me. In Cedar County, we had an office in Tipton, the county seat, on election for the presidential election. And on election day, we had big signs, we had lots of food saying, first-time voters, welcome. And a lot of poor people came in. Getting poor people to vote, of course, using the word, we're not even supposed to, well, nobody's poor anymore in America. Well, we are. And it's easier to knock on doors in a middle-class subdivision than it is in a lower-income neighborhood. But it's in the political process where, and I've seen this with candidates and I've seen this with volunteers, it is really where the heart of America is, where everybody is of equal value. I've seen candidates walk in to work a room and they talk to the 3 most important people in the room.
Yep.
And you go up and you say, why'd you do that? And they go, well, there's 50 people here.
They're looking for money is what they're looking for.
Well, or they think that because somebody is an influence, they think somebody is an influence maker. And nobody has ever, I've never seen that work in Iowa. Maybe it works in other places, but it just doesn't work here. And if there's people in the room and you're a candidate, you just have to learn how do you work a room with 50 people? How do you, shake everybody's hand? And that's why you send candidates generally into bars to have them learn how to work at the bar. At least Democratic candidates you do. Why? Because there's a lot of people. And Minette Doder, God rest her soul, was a master at this.
Yes, she was.
Was a master at working a room. And that was something she learned how to do. And it's a recognition that this is the system, unlike the educational system, which is a meritocracy, unlike the work system, which is competitive for capitalism. The system of democracy in Iowa is one person, one vote. Rich, poor, ugly, pretty, male, female, any gender, one person, one vote. It's a revolutionary concept, as we're learning by looking at the rest of the world. And in Iowa, we take it seriously. It's one of the love about Iowa. It is just, we take it seriously. And we can lose this. I think this is the other thing I want to mention. We can lose this. Because many times the caucus is looked at as an economic event. It generates money for hotel rooms, it generates money for restaurants, we bring in a lot of the national press, and they're spending money, and so that, well, the Iowa caucus generates, $40 million, $100 million, blah, blah, blah. And other states, we want to have that too.
Right. You think that's why other states want it for? I think they want the influence too. Don't you think they want what they see as our influence to choose a presidential candidate?
Well, yeah, people, there's a lot of discussion about, Iowa lacks diversity. What is Iowa doing? How dare they? They have this big influence, complete disproportion. All that kind of discussion, right?
And they say we're not representative of the rest of the country.
Right.
We were talking about that in terms of Obama, but
that's right.
That most people see that as a disadvantage.
Right.
Is that we're mostly white.
Well, it's all of a sudden the rest of the country has become like identity politics, uber alles, one of the things that we do in Iowa, the best description of Iowa's politics, I think, is somebody from the press several years ago was saying they look like a Grant Wood painting, and they talk like the McNeil-Lehrer Hour. And at our best,
I like that.
That's true.
Yeah.
At our best, that's true, right? I mean, we aren't particularly well dressed or concerned about that. I mean, we're acceptably dressed, but this is not the fashion industry capital, right?
Right.
On the other hand, you are given points for being well informed. And it's not easy, and I think we've talked a little bit about that, but when I first came to Iowa in '65, we had the Des Moines Register. We had a statewide newspaper. We no longer have that. And the way the national newspaper...
We have a newspaper that claims to be a statewide newspaper.
Right. But for example, this last time I saw that the national press was distributed by campaign. And there were various reasons for that, but most of them boiled down to economics. So you didn't have, like the New York Times didn't have a stringer in the Obama or the Los Angeles Times. And it came home to me, Michelle Obama came to West Branch in January. It was fairly close to the caucus.
It was a day after New Year's.
Yeah, it was very early, right, it was right, right. And reporter from the Los Angeles Times, it was the first time she had seen her. We had seen her like a dozen times.
Right.
Why? Because she was covering all the candidates. So she would be calling into her editor and say, where do you want me to go tomorrow? And when I say all the candidates, I mean the Republican candidates as well as the Democratic candidates. So it was not, that was not unusual. And that, I think, we have a responsibility in Iowa to do this, because we are now showing not only the United States of America, but we're showing a little bit to Egypt and to Syria that you can do it like this.
Well, and one of my best friends right now comes from one of the countries that just had the Arab Spring Revolution, and they're very interested in what we're doing and how we do it. And
also,
it is important for us to be an
we
example.
may not be diverse in the way that other people define it, right? But boy, we know our differences, right? I mean, we may not shout them from the rooftops, but rural America has gone through some big changes since the 1980s.
Yeah.
And class differences in Iowa, I think, are more pronounced. And to figure out a way to talk over that class divide. I just recently watched the documentary about Postville, Iowa, and we have problems in Iowa that we should be ashamed of and work on more. And the caucuses is the place we talk about that stuff, right?
Yep.
I mean, because you usually get somebody in the caucus who comes and they're just pissed about something. I love this person. They haven't been to a caucus, but they are livid about something, right? Some public policy that is just hurting them or hurting their family. And they want somebody to talk to about it and listen. And the caucus is a place for that too. So that if you are feeling powerless on January 3rd, if you're feeling depressed, if you're feeling marginalized, that's who we want.
January 3rd, and when are the Democratic conference?
January 3rd.
And what
Same
time?
night, 7 o'clock.
7 o'clock. Is it?
We'll
what
be
day is
dancing
that?
democracy. It's a Tuesday
A
night.
Tuesday.
So we'll be dancing for democracy all over the state.
Yeah. Now, we've talked about your best or your worst experience.
Right.
What was your best experience?
Probably supporting Shirley Chisholm, African-American woman from Brooklyn, New York, a congresswoman, who was running for president. More serious women candidates for president, with all due respects to Ms. Woodhull from the previous century. And it was the year that McGovern was running. And so the McGovern people would say to us, well, you know, you have our heart, but, you know, we're the smart ones. We know what's going on. And actually, McGovern was probably as much of a disaster for the Democratic Party as the present Tea Parties are for the Republican Party. Just to educate people a little bit about this, the liberals, include myself in that very honorable title, and the anti-war activists were very dedicated to getting an anti-war candidate. And it was a huge fight in the Democratic Party to get McGovern as a candidate. And he carried one state. It was simply not a majoritarian candidate. Other things accomplished, but it was as an electoral candidate, it was a disaster. And that's probably true with the Tea Party people and the Republican Party. At least the Pew Charitable Trust tells us, according to their polling, that 40% of Republican Party goers, primary goers or caucus goers in the Republican Party or Tea Party, identify with the Tea Party. The general Republican Party, it's down to 10%. In the general electorate, it's 5%. So you may very well have a situation where a political party gets dominated by a particular group with a viewpoint that can take control over that candidate, but that candidate is not acceptable to the majority.
Well,
but that's majoritarian democracy.
And one of the criticisms of the Iowa caucuses is that the Iowa Republican Party is too conservative and the Iowa Democratic Party is too liberal.
Yeah, that's what
And
they say.
you hear that
Right.
that as one of the criticisms of
Right.
having the caucuses the first in the nation.
Well, and that may be true. However,
Except in Obama's case.
well, I mean, there were 230,000 Iowans and the Democrats participated in the presidential caucus. That is a huge number of people.
There were
And
more than ever, yeah.
Right, and that Iowa pulled it off. That we say, you know, it's cold, it's January, go out, talk to people, stand up and be counted, raise your hand for this candidate, and they did it. And I think we have to be the problems with the Democratic Party in the caucus. One of the problems was John Edwards. John Edwards was not properly vetted in this state.
Apparently not.
Right? And twice he achieved quite a bit of support. And
Well, I'm proud to say I was one of those people.
well,
Yes.
yes, all right, Pat.
Yes, he hid something from me, and I'm not happy about that.
No,
and
we need to
I'm not
figure
happy
out. We
about-
need to figure out how that happened.
I'm not happy about the fact that he lied about it. But, you know, I know lots of people who felt very betrayed by what he did.
Yeah, and we need to figure out how to tweak that process. Or
We're
so
retail
that
politics. We looked this man in the eye and we didn't know he was lying to
right.
us.
And
How does that
well, some people did not know that, but it's something we need to
Were
talk
there people
about.
who did know he was lying to them?
I never bought a 25 square foot house and a $400 haircut ever. I don't care how many jeans he wore. But you know, but that's the conversation that's part of the vetting process, right? I mean, and
Right, that's what I'm saying.
yeah, that's
we
right.
looked him in the eye and he lied to us and we
Yeah.
believed him.
Some people did, and some people didn't.
I'm talking
Right.
about those of us who did.
Confession time here.
Yeah.
But it was fun working for Shirley Chisholm. And, at some point, you know, that because of this viability rule, it was a challenge throughout every part of this process to get enough supporters to continue to make her viable. And at one point, this was in Johnson County, We were at the district convention, and the viability was with 2 votes. We needed 2 votes to be viable. And there was a rumor going around, we don't know who started this, that she was announced going to drop out. And this was a few days before the district convention, so we had contacted her office, and I had actually gone to New York in part of this process to meet her and to meet her campaign, which was her husband. And she gave her announcement speech in her grade school in Bedford-Stuyvesant. And every American that went to a public grade school could identify with that, the joy of going back to your grade school and saying, I'm announcing my candidacy for President of the United States. It was an amazing evening. But anyway, so we got her to send a telegram to us. And these are the days when telegrams still arrived on yellow sheets. You know? And we said, we need you to send a telegram to us saying you're staying in the race. And typical Chisholm, she sent 6 pages. It probably was her whole campaign budget. And so somebody stood up and said, we have a telegram from Shirley Chisholm that we want to read immediately. Spell misinformation. Everybody thought it was going to be, 3 sentences. It's a telegram. And they stand up and they had the telegram crunched up. And then they began to uncrunch it. And after like 6 minutes, people say, hey, that's unfair. Your candidate's getting to read their whole campaign. But that was, you knew it was historic, and you also knew it was an example of how democracy works. You don't get a President Obama until you've had a Jesse Jackson, until you've had Chisholm, and hopefully I'll live long enough to see a woman president and a woman in this country, and because we've had a Hillary Clinton and a Geraldine Ferraro, and maybe even a Michelle Bachmann. How did Michelle Bachmann go over in West Branch? She's a native
Did she go to West Branch?
Oh,
No.
Oh.
She doesn't.
no. I had personally never heard anyone talk of Michelle Bachmann. I was visiting with my family in southern Iowa when this whole thing started. And, everyone just didn't know what to do. My dad, to say it blankly, thought she was crazy, but crazy to the point that it would possibly work.
Yeah.
I mean, there are some people out there who are extremists, and they're going what they're going to say, and some people will agree with it, and possibly a lot of people won't. So the only reactions I got on Michelle Bachmann were not so great. But
well, she was a native, as an adopted Iowan. I'm always very sensitive when Native Iowans stand up and say, I'm a Native Iowan, my roots give me certain rights and privileges. Until she was 11. So I don't think that's a big deal.
No.
But the other thing we're talking about that I want to communicate to people, because I think one of the things that people that turns people off about the political process, whether it's the caucus or voting, is the lack of civility.
Yeah.
As an old lady, I lived through other periods in American politics, which were a lot less civil than this, the McCarthy era in particular. But the lack of civility is a problem. And I think it's a problem more for the other side than for us. But we have strong opinions in the Democratic Party in Iowa, but I think we have good smiles
And
too.
I'm betting the Republicans have strong opinions too.
Yeah.
I'm betting they also have strong opinions. You know what? We're running out of time here, so I want to know, Ann, what you're planning on doing at the caucus.
Well, first of all, my father is running our county's caucus, so I will be helping with him. I'll be helping everyone sign in. I'll be helping register people, registering myself.
Yes.
And, I plan to, I don't know, just...
Are you going to take them over resolutions?
I might have to learn them myself. I want this to be a learning experience for me. I kind of want to go into it just as a seeing what it's about, seeing what people do, because I haven't.
Let's write a resolution for Ann right now.
You
resolved
can reinvent
that.
this. You will reinvent the caucus. Your whole generation will. There's not a right and wrong way here. I mean, it's the way I did it, and I was we should do it. But no, it's a new dance. You get to dance. You get to make up a new dance step.
Okay.
But you can bring a resolution about just say that we support affordable education for everyone.
Right.
You know, that's a resolution.
Or you want election day to be a state holiday. That's what I like.
There's
that would
one.
make life a lot easier.
Yep.
It would.
And it would communicate to people. You know, you take your children to the polls because you don't have to go to work today.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way we learn to vote.
We think that affordable care, health care is a right, not a privilege. That's another resolution.
Another resolution is, you know, sometimes you can just do honorable things.
Mm-hmm.
Like we honor George Clooney.
No, we're not going to do that.
Putting his money into private satellites.
Yeah, but we're not going to put him in there.
Oh,
Not
maybe.
my caucus.
Well, maybe
Claire
it was
might
great.
try.
I might.
Yes.
As a human rights activist, it's right up there.
We can say we want to see the United States bring their troops home yesterday
Right,
from Afghanistan and Iraq,
right.
and not to bomb Iran,
Not bombing anybody.
not bombing anybody.
For right now.
Right.
Just keep those at home.
Well, the use of military force has always been a topic of conversation in America, and the caucus is a good place.
Very true.
So everybody should go to the caucus, just because, and especially if you disagree with anything you've heard on this show.
That's absolutely true, and we
Because
encourage
one of the
everyone
things
to
we
go.
do is we believe in democracy.
If
And
you
it's
go,
not self-actuating, and there are ways that you serve democracy other than the military, which is very important and honorable. It is also honorable to vote, to educate yourself, to write letters to the editor, and to go to the caucus on January 3rd. There's nothing more important that you'll
January
be
3rd,
doing.
the Democratic caucus is at 7. I suppose the Republican one
Yep.
is as well.
Right?
And again, we want to reiterate where to find out. Google the Iowa Democratic Party and check your community.
Yeah,
What
your
is it?
county.
Your county? Does it
your
go by county?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Go by county.
And thank you for having us on this topic.
This was wonderful
up.
to have you here.
Talk it up.
And we're going to be cut off any second now. This has been really fun. Thanks for coming.
You're welcome.
Ann
you.
Owen and Claire Olson.
Thank you, Pat Miner.
Thank you.
Fight their oil war. National Geographic and the Times Picayune, they forecast the apocalypse, said it was coming soon. Preparations must be made, they said, now is the time. Years ago they shouted, inaction was a crime. They said the dikes must be improved and the wetlands must be saved. But Washington decided instead they should be paved, 'cause malls were more important than people.